Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and you are watching a new episode of Wojennik TV. Today I would like to present a new English review. The majority of our reviews is in Polish, but some of them are also in English, in French, because we try to present reviews, unboxings in different languages in order to present the games which we are showing on our channel to different audiences. And today an English review of a great game of a great designer published in 2017 by Osprey Games, and the game is London. The game itself was created by Martin Wallace back in 2010. So the game was first published by Tree Frog Editions, the designing company of Martin Wallace, but since then it has been redesigned and republished by Osprey Games. So we have two different editions, the first one from 2010 and the second one from 2017. Both are different in terms of the quality of design, the quality of the components, because the box, the art has been redone, but also in the terms of mechanics, because both games are slightly different when it comes to the rules, when it comes to the way that some mechanisms work. So London, the first edition, and London, the second edition, are separate games. People who know the first edition will be pleasantly surprised by the second one. The game itself is meant to be played by from 2 to 4 players. All of them will be creating their own tableau with cards, because London is a card game. This tableau will represent London, the capital city of the United Kingdom. We will start the game in the mid-17th century, after the disastrous fire of London back in 1666, and creating our own city, expanding its limits. We will travel in time to the beginnings of the 20th century. Now we have also a Polish accent in this edition, because the cards and the artwork has been done by 3 different people, by Mike Atkinson, and by 2 Polish people, by 2 Poles. First of all by Natalia Borek, and secondly by Przemysław Sobiecki. So the game is, as I said earlier, a re-implementation of London first edition, and today I would like to show you how this game works, what are its components, and finally what are my final thoughts about this game. Is it worth to acquire it? Is it worth to invite London to your house? Let's go. At first, let's take a closer look at all the beautiful components that are enclosed in this elegant box. So first of all, we receive a board, a playing board. It's called the development board. But unless, like in many other games, it's not the board where we'll be placing pawns or cards played by us. This will be the board on which, first of all, we will count our prestige points in a track. Each player will receive his own pawn to indicate his prestige points, which will be accumulated during the game and also added after the game has ended. The second thing on this board is a small information, a small table indicating how much poverty points we can accumulate, or rather how many prestige points we lose if we have some poverty points at the end of the game. Because in London we will not only gain prestige points, we will also accumulate poverty, which during the game will not influence the gameplay, but afterwards, when the game ends, the players with the most poverty will receive negative points according to this track. Then we have also some spaces where cards will be placed. Those cards will be discarded from the hands of the players, and they will be placed on this display board. Now, first of all, we have 3 kinds of colors. The light ones are the places where cards will be placed in 2-player games. The gray ones will be used if playing are 3-player games, and the dark ones will be added if we play a 4-players game. So, as you can see, the board is also very elegant. It's not too big, it's just as it should be. The second thing we receive are cards, and we receive 2 types of cards in London. First of all, big cards, borough cards, which will be used to represent land in London. These cards will be used during play. They will be bought by players. Each such a card has an information if it is located in the northern part or in the southern part of London. Those locations are also riverside locations or locations somewhere farther from the river. Those locations have a distinct name, a cost. They will also add some benefits when bought, and some of them will have an action which will be used or obligatory or facultatively during play. Some additional boroughs have also an activation effect when we are running our city. But about this a little bit in some time. So at first we only have 3 borough cards, and those will be always be the same: Suffolk and Bermondsey, Westminster and City. But during play, when a card is bought, a new one is placed instantly and available to be bought. Those cards represent some London landmarks, some today's parts of London. They are, as you can see, all stunning when it comes to the artwork, so that's one of the prettiest things that I have ever seen in games. The second type of cards that we receive are smaller cards, standard size, and those cards are cards which will be used to construct our own city. Those cards are divided into 3 categories. The first one are A cards, the second one are B cards, and the third one, as you might expect, is C cards. Those cards are shuffled before the game begins. A cards will go on top of the stack, B cards will go to the middle of the stack, and C cards will go to the bottom of the deck. So those cards will be separated in such a way, forming the playing deck. Why such a difference? Because in A cards we have cards related to London somewhere in the middle of the 17th century, whereas in B and C we have cards representing places, people from the 18th, the 19th century. While drawing cards from the deck, we will be advancing in the timeline towards contemporary times. Now the cards will be used to make some actions. As you can see, each card has its name, it has an artwork, it has also some spaces. Some cards require additional cost when placed, whereas some others don't. Some cards have an immediate effect, an effect which will be acquired when you run the city, but some others will have also an immediate effect or an immediate thing to do or to remember when we place such a card into play. The cards have also 2 spaces on the bottom of them. On the left we have a cost which has to be spent if we run the city in order to receive the income or the benefit of the card, whereas on the right we have the information if such a card after being used is flipped over, because cards in our display will be flipped over. As you can see, we receive also some pauper's card. Those cards will be at most times cards which will influence gameplay by blocking our hand, by increasing the number of cards that we have in our hand. in general, we will try to get rid of paupers as soon as possible. The other cards, as you can see, are divided into three colors, three major colors: brown cards, pink cards, and blue cards. The brown ones are in general related to finance, the pink one to politics, and the blue to culture and science. We receive also some cards labeled with the word action. Those work a little bit differently than standard cards, but I will talk about gameplay in a few moments. Now, what we receive also is some counters. First of all, money counters. We receive 1, 5 and 10 pounds counters, which will be used in order to buy in order to buy land, in order to place some cards or activate them. We receive, as in many Martin Wallace games, loans. It is possible to take loans in London, so when you do, you receive some money from the bank, but you also receive a loan token, which will firstly be a mnemonic, which will first of all obligatory, which will imply the fact that you will have to pay it. Secondly, it will also influence the quantity of poverty that you generate each time you run the city. When it comes to poverty, we receive some poverty tokens, poverty cubes, which will be 1 poverty, poverty discs, which will be 5 poverty, and finally poverty tokens, which will be 15 poverty. The last but very important element is the rule book. Now, the rule book for London is a rule book that has been rewritten. The rules of the second edition are a little bit different than the first. It's a very, very well written rule book. As you can see, a rule book in color with some bold sections or italics used in the text, with some examples, with some images which show exactly how to set up the game, how to develop, or how to run our city. I must say that when it comes to Martin Wallace's games, the rules are often quite simple, but the rule books were written very often in such a way that we were scratching our head, or we were thinking about some issues that were not clarified in the rule books. When it comes to London, the second edition, I must say it's a very well written rule book. After reading those rules, I didn't have absolutely any doubts how to play the game. At the back, you also have a small explanation of the card symbols, because you will find some symbols on the cards. Very simple, very intuitive, and additionally, the prestige lost due to poverty, the same track that we receive on the board. Now, that's it when it comes to the components of London. Now, how the game works. The objective of the game is to accumulate the most possible prestige points. At the end of the game, prestige decides of who wins. In case of a tie, it's the quantity of poverty cubes which decides. Of course, the player who has the least poverty cubes in such a case wins. Ties happen in London, but they are not very frequent. There's also another tiebreaker in case of the poverty tie, so I don't think it's an issue which will happen very often. Now, in order to accumulate prestige points, we can do several things. First of all, we can buy boroughs, which are those big, beautiful cards. Each borough gives you a certain number of prestige points immediately after you buy such a card. The second way is also to build our own city in our display. So each and every player will develop his own city, adding cards to his own display, and those cards will be cards which will not grant any points at the end of the game, but they can grant points during the game if we run the city. Secondly, there will be cards which will be worth some points at the end of the game if we have them in our display. Those cards will be placed in our display in such a way that they will be forming stacks of cards. What is important is cards in those stacks will be placed face up, but when you run the city, those cards will be sometimes flipped over and they will be placed face down. At the end of the game, it's irrelevant if the card stays up or down, it does grant you points. Now, how a turn of London is played. First of all, the first thing that a player has to do at the beginning of his turn is to draw one card. Those cards can be drawn from two sources. The first one is the stack. You can blindly draw one card from the stack. This card is immediately added to your hand. The second option, a much safer option, because in such a way, if you draw cards from the stack, you never know if it's not a pauper card, so a gray card which will just stuck in your hand and which will cause you to accumulate some poverty. The second way is to buy cards from the display board, from the development board, because those cards which will be used during gameplay will be placed in this board and disposable to be acquired by the player who plays his turn. We can pick any card from the upper and from the lower row. It's up to the player which card to take. After taking a card and adding it to his hand, a player has four options, because we have four actions in London. The first one is to buy a borough. Those boroughs, as I explained earlier, are always placed in such a way that we can see them. We have always three to our disposal. We just pay the cost, take the card, and first of all receive all the benefits. Those benefits can be additional cards which we will draw from the deck or from the display board. Will be prestige points added immediately to our score, and sometimes, for instance, those boroughs will grant us benefits such as liquidating some of our poverty cubes. So if I had, for instance, 3 poverty cubes, buying Greenwich would cause me to discard all of them. That's good. Additionally, such a borough is added to those that I already had. During gameplay, we will buy several boroughs, but at any given moment, only one of them will be active. A new borough is placed over the previous one, cancelling the effect or the ability of such a card. So buying Greenwich will grant me some additional things, but it will also liquidate, it will also cancel the special capacity of Westminster. Those boroughs are placed in such a way just to show the location of the previous ones, because some cards are related to boroughs located to the north, to the south, or riverside boroughs. So that's the first action. You basically just buy a card, add it to your boroughs, and end your turn. After buying such a borough, a new is immediately placed and it's available to be bought by other players or by us if it's our turn again. The second option is developing your city. Developing your city consists of playing cards from our hand. The maximum of cards that we can have at the end of our turn is 9, but we can exceed this number during our turn. For instance, if we have an ability which enables us to draw more cards, some boroughs, for instance, can help us to draw more cards than just one at the beginning of our turn, then we can have a higher number during our turn. But at the end of the turn, we have to discard in order to have not more than 9. During our turn, if we decide to develop our city, we can play cards from our hand. Now, basically, we can play any card, but there are some conditions to be met. First of all, if the card requires some money, we have to pay it when placing it in our display. Secondly, adding such a card is possible only if it requires us to make a decision. If we construct such a card in a card that was already placed previously but then flipped over, or we can also place it on a face-up card. Sometimes it's useful. The third option is to add a new column. So place it somewhere where we didn't have a stack till this moment. Now, this is important because the third action, which I will be talking in a few moments, consists of running our city. But after running our city, we will acquire some poverty points. The more columns we have in our display, the more poverty we will receive. So each time placing a new card requires us to think about this if we want to construct a new stack or maybe use one of those that we have in play. A third condition, a very important condition, is placing a card requires us to discard from our hand a card of the same color. So if I had only one blue card in my hand, I wouldn't be able to play it. As I have Waterworks and Hospital, I can play Waterworks and discard Hospital. A discarded card is placed on the development board. If the upper row is full, we place the card in the lower row. I can build additional cards. For instance, I would be able to place the East India Company, paying first of all £4 and then discarding also a brown card to the display. If the development board is full, if there are no free spaces and I have to discard a card, we just clear the lower row, we put the cards from the upper row to the lower row, and we make some space. New cards will be discarded to the upper row. Developing the city consists of just playing cards. When I'm done and I end my turn. As I said earlier, paupers are sticking in my hand. I have absolutely no way to get rid of them with the current cards, but I can rid of them using some actions which I will be showing in a moment, or exceeding 9 cards. If I do at the end of the turn, I will be able to discard those cards, placing them on the development board. Now that's the second action, so developing my city. The third action is running my city, which is nothing else than just activating my cards. After developing my city, I have some options because each card face up gives me a possible benefit if I decide to activate it. I can activate each card in my display which is face up, but I can decide by which one I would like to begin, and I can also decide not to activate a card if I find it useful. Now, if I had those 3 cards, for instance, in my display, I could run my city and decide first of all to activate the Covent Garden, which would first of all give me £5, 2 prestige points, but it would also require me to flip the card over. The second card is East India Company, which first of all requires me to discard a card. So that's not very bad because I can just get rid of one of those 2 paupers, place it on the development board and activate the East India Company, receiving £12 and flip this card. The third card is Waterworks, which also will be flipped, but it will give me 1 prestige point at the end of the game. In the same time, activating the city permits me to discard 2 poverty cubes. The second thing which I have to remember is to check my borrow, because some borrows have also an compulsory activation. For instance, Westminster, each time I run my city, requires me to pay £1 to the bank. But as my most recent borough is Greenwich, I don't have such an activation cost, so I just can skip it. After running my city, after acquiring all the benefits, I have to calculate poverty. At that point, I will have to take poverty cubes. The number of poverty cubes acquired is calculated in the following way. First of all, I will receive 1 poverty cube for each stack of cards. So that's the answer why I cannot just build 12, 15, 22 stacks of cards, because that would kill me instantly. That would produce such a number of poverty cubes that I would automatically lose the game. With 3 stacks, with face up or face down cards, irrelevant, I have to take 1 poverty cube. 1 poverty cube is also taken for each card which stays in my hand at this moment. With those 2, I have to take 2 more poverty cubes. Finally, if I have any loans, I will also have to take 1 poverty cube for each loan. So with 3 stacks, 0 loans, 2 cards in my hand, I have to take 5 poverty points, and I will have to live with it. That ends the run our city action. The 4th action is the simplest. It just consists of drawing 3 cards. So it's a quick way to replenish our hand, to take precious cards which are lying on the development board, or to acquire cards of the colors which we want to obtain. After ending our action, we verify the number of cards in our hand, and if we have more than 9, we have to discard the excess. The game is played in such a way until the deck of cards runs out, is emptied. At that point, all the players, after the player who emptied the deck, have the possibility to play 1 final turn. At the end of the game, we verify the number of prestige points on the prestige track. We count the points in our city, so we take all the cards from our stacks. We are searching for prestige points which are automatically added to the track. We have to pay loans. Loans can be taken at any time, but they can be paid at the beginning of our turn or at the end of the game. We receive £10 when taking a loan, but paying a loan requires us to pay £15. If we are unable until the end of the game, each loan unpaid is equal to 7 prestige to a 7 prestige point lost. We receive some prestige points for each set of £3. Finally, and the player who has accumulated the most prestige at this point just wins the game. So this is basically how London, the 2nd edition, works. Now I would like to tell you a little bit about what I find, how I find this game, if it's a good game in my opinion, how it plays, what are its strong points, what are its weaker points. Now, before the conclusion, a few words about poverty, because I do not know why I just omitted this a few moments ago, and that's a crucial part of London. So when we accumulate points at the end of the game, we also look at poverty. We verify the number of poverty tokens that each player has. And at this point, we verify which player has the fewest number of such tokens, of such points. So for instance, if we play a 3-player game, if one of those players has 3 poverty points, the second has 7 and the last has 13, we look at the 3 points accumulated by the first player. This player discards each and every poverty point that he has and all his opponents also discard the same number of poverty points. So if we take a look at the example from a few moments before, all the players will discard 3 poverty tokens, leaving the second player with 4 poverty tokens at the end, and the third player with 10, because he discarded 3, so he had 13, now he has only 10. After discarding those tokens, we look at the board where we have the information that says how many points each player loses for his poverty remaining. So, for instance, if a player finishes the game with 5 poverty points, he will lose 5 prestige points. But if he had 9 poverty points, he will lose 13. If he has more than 10 poverty points, he will lose 15 and 3 for each point above 10. So if we have many poverty tokens, many poverty points at the end of the game, we will just lose a huge amount of prestige points. And during one of my games, it even happened that my opponent had negative poverty points. So that's the poverty mechanism in London, a very important one. I will talk about it in just a few moments during the conclusion, which I would like to present right now. London is not the first game published by Osprey Games, which is the subject of a review on our channel, because back in 2017, I believe, I have also prepared a review of Escape from Colditz. And the game, just like London, was a re-implementation of a much older game. What stands out when it comes to Osprey Games is that the games that they publish, the games that they create, are always of very high quality when it comes to the components, and London is not an exception. What we receive is a very elegant box containing very, very nice elements. Now, I very much like the artwork. I believe it has been very nicely done. First of all, it's very invocative, it's very pretty, and it's also very functional, because when we look at the cards, we do not have absolutely any doubts how to read the information on those cards. Maybe the information about victory points, prestige points should be a little bit more, bigger, better seen from far, but it's just a detail. Now, so the first thing I would like to underline is that the elements of this game are just top-notch. You receive a game very elegant, a game that will very nicely fit to your shelf, and a game that is very pretty to look at when we lay it on the table. Secondly, the game is very pretty when we play it, it's very functional. The cards are also of a high quality. They are cards which are very easily kept in our hands, which are very easily shuffled when we need to do this, but also they just sit on the board. We do not have the problem which is a problem in many games. They do not slip away somewhere when you make a false movement. The second thing about London is its flow, its game flow. I believe it's a game very well designed in this sector. It's a game that has a great flow. It's a game a little bit like solitaire game, because every player will create their own tableau, but we have some interaction which increases the way that those players will interact. We have some games, for instance, Race for the Galaxy, when it comes to the base edition, where each player just plays for himself without even looking what other players are doing. Well, maybe it's a little exaggerated, but it's quite the way that the game works. In London, it's not quite the same. Each player will create their own tableau, will create their own city, and the way that the cards are cycled, the way that the cards can be used, increases this interaction between players. Because the third thing that I would like to say that I very like in London is the way that the card cycle was designed. The cards can be used in different ways. We use them to create our own tableau, our own city. Secondly, we use them also to activate some effects, and we use them also sometimes to make some combos or to replenish our hand. Each time we have to choose firstly from where we are drawing the cards, because we have two options. We can draw cards blindly from the stack, or we can draw cards from the board. Both options are tempting, and it's very tactical when we decide from where we should draw. Additionally, when we draw from the board, we just can steal a card that we know that our opponent will want to take during his turn. So this interaction is also a part of the game, and it increases those connections between players. That's fine, because some players do not like solitary games where we just create our own tableau or we play by ourselves, and then at the end of the game we compare our scores to the opponent and we say, oh yes, okay, I just did a fine city, I just did a fine empire, I have 63 points. You have built a magnificent empire. That's nice to see, because that's the first moment when you just take a look at the opponent's cards. In London, it will not work this way. What I like is the way that those cards are cycled, because you can pay for a card, placing them in your city, but placing them on the board, then you can retrieve them, or another player can retrieve those cards. Some cards are discarded permanently if the board is full. So those cards will just cycle, will just travel from one place to another, and that is a great idea, because a card drawn is not blocked in the hand of a player. It can easily travel to the hand of another player through the development board. Now, what I like also is the fact that you do have to think a lot while playing London. You have multiple options. As always, when it comes to Martin Wallace's games, you have not so many actions, 4 actions only, but you always have to wisely choose which action to play and how to use it. So from a limited number of options, you receive a huge number of options. That's a Martin Wallace fingerprint. It's a part of many of his designs. So while playing London, you will have to wisely choose how to use your cards, when to run your city, because that's the crucial part of the game, and also how to control poverty. I like very much the way that poverty has been redone in London, because in the first edition it was very easily to control. In the second edition it's very much different, it's more difficult to control it, and it's another reason why you always have to closely look at what your opponents are doing, because at the end only the player who has the fewest poverty tokens can discard them all. All the other players will have some poverty points at the end, at the final scoring, and that's the moment when those tokens will really matter, because you can lose a lot of points. As in many Wallace's games, we have loan tokens, but I must say, when playing the second edition of London, I wasn't using them as often as I did in the first edition, and not even close that often as in Brass, because in Brass you always take loans, you just have to take loans. In London, the second edition, it's possible to play even without taking a single loan during the entire game. It all depends on the way that your opponents are playing. If they play slow, there's no reason to take loans. If they play more aggressively, if you see that you can obtain a great benefit while taking a loan, just do it. Now, those are the strengths of this game, the things that I really liked. Now, what are the things that I think could have been done a little bit better, or are the weak points of this edition? Now, first of all, I would like to say that while we are creating our own tableau, while we are building our own city, it's not really you do not really feel as you were building a city. You just lay cards. And that's fine, because in many games you just build your empire, stacking some units, creating buildings, building cities, or using cards in order to create some structures. In London you build your city, but this city is very temporary, because when you run your city, the majority of the cards that you stacked, that you played, are just flipped over and the city is razed to the ground. So in fact, I didn't have, while playing this game, the feeling that I was building my own city, that London was developing. Of course, you have boroughs, you have cards that will remain with you, but the majority of the cards that you will play will be covered by other cards or flipped over. The number of cards which remain face up during the game is very limited. So I didn't have this feeling that I am placing monuments, that I am upgrading my city. I just had the feeling that I was building my city from scratch each and time again. So I believe that this could be a problem, because the illustrations, the narrative is great, is fine, but it does not really cope well. It doesn't really it's not very well attached with the mechanism of running your city and building it once more. Maybe we can create some narrative telling that it's due to the fact that older buildings have to be raised in order to create some new ones, but I just didn't have this feeling. The second thing is, you receive a lot of cards, but I had the feeling that we are not receiving a sufficient number of monuments, of buildings of great importance of contemporary London. London is a huge city with hundreds, thousands of interesting places, and the number of them which is enclosed in this box is very limited. We have many buildings which are unnamed. We have some structures as the sewers, as the tube, the underground, but we have very few monuments. Maybe it's due to some legal problems, but that would be that would be much more better if we had a bigger number of such monuments. Maybe that could enable an increase of this feeling of building the city, and the city would be and also the game would have a bigger impact on the learning, on the teaching aspect, because London is also a game thanks to which you can learn something about London, about its history, about its evolution, about its monuments. While using this edition, we do not really receive many information about those buildings, maybe except borough cards, which are top-notch, but the action cards are something, I'd say, of a different quality. Now, having said that, London is a game very well designed, with a very interesting game flow, with a very interesting way that you use your cards, a game with a lot of interaction, a game which can easily be played in 60 minutes or so, a game beautiful to look at, very functional. That's one of my preferred Martin Wallace's games. It's not better than Brass, but it's very difficult to beat Brass. But it's a game of a little bit different category. I said at the beginning that if you already know London because you had the opportunity to play the first edition, you will be pleasantly surprised by the second one. It's a different game enclosed in a different box with the same name, but as a designer, its ideas are still the same. That was London from Osprey Games Publishing. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you to check our other movies, our reviews, our unboxings. Have a great day and bye.